Have you ever felt invisible, even though you always do the right thing? What if being nice isn't the virtue you thought it was, but a silent trap? And what if the strength you're seeking isn't found in rebellion, but in quiet clarity? If you constantly agree with the crowd, even when everything seems fine, you're already paving the way for your own downfall. Seneca warned us, trying too hard to keep the peace can cost you your presence. You were taught to be nice, to be polite, to avoid rocking the boat. So you made yourself smaller, dimming your light to keep others comfortable. And now, you wonder why nobody truly sees you. Many men fall into the trap of thinking that kindness is the same as goodness, and that goodness requires silence. But the more you give, the more people take you for granted. You keep saying yes, while your inner voice screams no. You stay quiet, not because you agree, but because you fear rejection. But here's the real question. What if your version of being a good man is exactly what's been holding you back all this time? This isn't a video about turning cold or becoming hard. It's about finding clarity, cutting through the fog of approval, seeking to rediscover your core. Because stopping the habit of being too nice isn't an act of rebellion, it's an act of responsibility. People-pleasing isn't a virtue, it's a survival tactic you picked up long ago, but you don't need it anymore. And Stoic masculinity? It's not about dominance or control, it's about presence. It's about principle. It's about power that doesn't need permission to exist. You are not alone in this. So many strong men today feel drained, overlooked, and emotionally worn out. Not because they lack worth, but because they've handed it out too easily. If that sounds like you, then this is your turning point. It's time to stop fading just to fit in. It's time to draw your boundaries, not in anger, but in dignity. Let's walk the Stoic path together, a path where self-respect takes the place of approval, where you stop performing and start existing. Stay close, because what comes next might just change the way you show up in the world. Let's begin. Now, strength does not mean submission. You don't have to harden your heart to be respected, but you do have to stop being too agreeable if you want to be seen. And that, right there, is the boundary most men were never taught to draw. From a young age, you were praised for being polite, quiet, and helpful. You were told not to interrupt, not to argue, not to challenge those in charge. You learned that being good meant being soft, meant keeping your opinions tucked away so others could stay comfortable. But as you grew into a man, that script stopped working. It didn't lead to respect. It led to invisibility. You were taught that being good means being liked. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. In the previous section, we uncovered how being too agreeable often leads to invisibility. Now, let's go deeper, because the difference between being liked and being respected is more profound than most realize. Marcus Aurelius, both a Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, didn't rule because he pleased everyone. He led because he was anchored in truth. He once wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That wasn't just advice. It was a way of life. He didn't bend under pressure, and he didn't sacrifice his principles just to make others comfortable. He wasn't aggressive, but he was immovable. He didn't chase applause, but he earned deep respect. And that's what modern culture has misunderstood. Today, men are told to be kind, but they're rarely shown how to be strong and kind at the same time. Without strength, kindness starts to look like weakness. Without boundaries, agreement slowly turns into silence. And that silence isn't rewarded with love or loyalty. It's punished with indifference and rejection. Because once you stop serving a clear purpose, the world doesn't hesitate to move on. Not because you weren't good, but because you weren't solid. Take the story of Aaron, a well-liked manager, dependable, always the first to volunteer, and never the one to complain. He stayed late, filled in gaps, and kept his head down. But when the company downsized, Aaron's name was on the list. Why? He never caused trouble, but he also never stood for himself. He was kind but not irreplaceable. They didn't choose who smiled the most. They chose who stood out. Seneca's warning echoes again. If you always agree with the crowd, even in peaceful times, you're unknowingly crafting your own collapse, and that's what's happening to many men today. You stay silent when your conscience disagrees. You nod along with ideas that contradict your values. You laugh at jokes that make your stomach turn, all in the name of fitting in. But here's the result. People overlook you, not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to believe your presence makes no difference. The Stoic knows better. He doesn't confuse virtue with submission. He understands goodness without strength isn't noble, it's usable. It's something others consume without appreciating. True virtue, when rooted in principle, doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't seek applause. It simply is. And that presence, quiet, grounded, unshakable, commands attention by existing with purpose. So, where do you begin? First, by letting go of the idea that being liked should be your highest aim. Shift your focus to alignment with your values, your voice, your truth. Speak not to fill the silence, but to fill the moment with meaning. Be kind, yes, but never at the cost of your core. Now that you've drawn that inner line, what does it mean to defend it? Let's explore that in the next part. Previously, we uncovered a powerful truth. Being liked isn't the same as being respected, and without boundaries, even kindness becomes dangerous. Now let's take that further, into the silent moments, where self-betrayal begins. Don't say yes just because you're afraid of what happens if you say no. Say yes because you mean it. And if your heart isn't behind the answer, pause. Let your stillness speak louder than any false agreement. You weren't made to be a comfort zone for everyone around you. You were meant to be a man of gravity, of presence, of principle, of consequence. So, stop entering every room hoping to be liked. Walk in carrying your values and trust that they're enough. Because if your version of being good requires you to be walked over, stepped on, or quietly dismissed, then it's not goodness. It's slow, silent self-erasure. And there's no honor in disappearing for the sake of peace. Here's the second truth. Kindness without boundaries is self-betrayal. You've been taught your entire life that kindness is a virtue, and it is. But you were also told that good men must be humble, agreeable, and endlessly patient. What no one warned you about was what happens when that kindness has no limits, when every forced yes takes a piece of your soul, when being polite turns into a 24/7 performance where you wear a smile like armor. You might call it empathy. You might justify it as emotional intelligence. But deep down, If you're honest with yourself, it's not strength, it's fear. Fear of not being liked, fear of being seen as difficult, fear of conflict, and in that fear, you betray yourself, quietly, repeatedly, one polite smile at a time. You weren't born to be this way, you were trained to be, conditioned by all the moments. You were told to be nice, to not upset anyone, to keep the peace. Good boys don't raise their voices. So you lowered yours. You held your tongue. You gave up your space in the room to make sure everyone else had theirs. Every time you avoided a disagreement, every time you buried your opinion to maintain harmony, you handed over a small piece of your will, what the Stoics called your prohairesis, your inner faculty of choice. What started as survival became habit, and that habit became your identity. Now you live in a pattern, one where you accommodate everyone, and there's never space left for you. Picture this. You're sitting in a meeting. Your boss asks you to take on more work. Again, you're exhausted. Every part of you wants to say no. But before your brain can catch up, your mouth agrees. You nod, you smile, you say, sure. And then later, in the quiet of your car on the way home, it hits you. That familiar, bitter thought. Why didn't I speak up? Why do I always fold? You tell yourself, I was just being kind. But deep down, you know that wasn't kindness. That was fear pretending to be virtue. Epictetus warned us, if you say yes when your soul screams no, you're not choosing, you're collapsing. But what would it look like to choose differently, to act not from fear, but from clarity? Let's continue on that path in the next part. We left off with a powerful idea. Saying yes when your soul says no isn't kindness, it's collapse. Now let's dive deeper into the Stoic response to that collapse and what it means to reclaim your strength through reason. Stoic philosophy never glorified obedience born from fear. It honors reason, and reason requires boundaries. Marcus Aurelius, one of the greatest Stoics and rulers in history, didn't mold himself to meet others' expectations. He shaped himself according to nature, logic, and clarity of thought. He famously wrote, "If it's not right, don't do it. If it's not true, don't say it." These weren't just moral principles, they were tools for living. Because when you agree out of fear, you silently give others permission to ignore your limits. And over time, they will. They will come to expect your silence. They will come to depend on your automatic yes. And in that process, you slowly stop being a person in their eyes. You become a function, a utility, a resource to be used, and eventually replaced when you're no longer convenient. They won't thank you. They'll forget you. There's nothing stoic about being liked by everyone. And there's nothing admirable about constantly shrinking yourself to protect the comfort of others. Seneca warned us about this. False humility is the most dangerous kind of self-harm because it pretends to be noble while slowly corroding your integrity from the inside out. Stoicism doesn't demand that you go to war with everyone around you, but it absolutely demands that you stop going to war with yourself. So stop dressing your fear in noble language. Stop wearing your inability to set boundaries like it's some badge of honor. Instead, start asking yourself one hard, honest question. Is this action truly aligned with my values, or am I just afraid of disappointing someone? That single question, it cuts through the fog. It dissolves the illusion that compliance equals goodness, and it brings you back to yourself with clarity. You're not here to be pleasing. You're here to be principled. And real kindness, the kind that Stoicism respects, only begins when you speak your truth without apology, when you stop betraying yourself in the name of being nice. Because let's be clear, a man who silences his own voice just to be accepted isn't good. He's vanishing, quietly, tragically. That brings us to the third principle. Earn respect through presence, not pleasing. Here's a brutal but necessary question. If you disappeared tomorrow, who would truly notice? It's a question that makes most men pause because for so long you built your identity on being helpful, agreeable, and conflict-free. You say yes, you stay late, you never push back, you follow the rules and do everything right, and yet you're still overlooked, still unheard, still passed over when it matters most. Why? Because you made the silent mistake of believing that being likable was the same as being respected. But the truth is, in this world, attention is currency. But respect is weight. No man gains weight by bending. So how do you gain it? That's where we're heading next. We just asked a hard question. If you disappeared, who would notice? Now let's look at what truly makes a man unforgettable, not through performance, but through presence. Respect begins the moment a man speaks with clarity, not noise. When he enters a room without chasing approval, people feel something shift. Not because he's loud, not because he dominates the space, but because he doesn't flinch, he doesn't shrink, he doesn't perform. In a world addicted to performance, that quiet strength, rooted and unmoved, is rare. And it's powerful. Picture a mountain. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't beg for attention. It doesn't shift with the weather, yet everything around it adapts. The wind curves around it. The clouds part above it. It commands respect, not by force, but by existing without compromise. That is the essence of Stoic presence. It's not about being loud. It's about being grounded so deeply, so clearly, that nothing outside you can shake what's within you. Marcus Aurelius wasn't remembered because he pleased Rome. He wasn't admired because he played politics. He faced betrayal, sickness, war, and still, he never begged for validation. His true strength wasn't his title. It was the dignity he carried through silence, through storms, through suffering. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's not a call to put on a show. That's a command to embody who you are. And look at Epictetus, born into slavery. No wealth, no status, no inherited power. But his words carried the weight of an emperor. Why? Because he lived what he taught. Because his identity wasn't shaped by the crowd. It was forged through clarity and choice. His life aligned with his message. He taught his students this powerful truth. People believe what they perceive. So when others look at you, what do they see? Do they see a man who holds the line? Or one who constantly steps back, plays it safe, avoids discomfort? Because when you have no boundaries, when you avoid truth, when you sacrifice your integrity to keep the peace, what they see isn't virtue. They see softness, and softness in a world driven by outcomes gets discarded, quietly, brutally. The moment you begin to base your worth on being liked, you've already started to bargain away your dignity. That's why so many men today feel empty, even as they check all the right boxes. They confuse being easy to work with being valued. But value doesn't come from being pleasant. It comes from being deliberate, from being clear, from being untouchable in your self-respect. The Stoics never told you to shout. They told you to become undeniable. There's a world of difference between the two. One begs for permission, the other stands in purpose. So if you want to earn respect, real, lasting respect, stop trying to be chosen through kindness. Start being remembered through clarity, because in the next part, we'll explore how clarity doesn't just change how others see you. It transforms how you see yourself. In the last part, we explored how clarity and presence earn respect, not noise or performance. Now let's talk about what it means to stop chasing approval and start commanding it through self-possession. You don't owe the world an explanation for every step you take. You don't need to manage everyone's emotions. Speak less, move with certainty. And when the moment calls for it, say no, without apology, without a scene, without guilt. Respect doesn't flow to the man who says yes to everything. It goes to the one who doesn't disappear when challenged. So, stop asking to be liked. Start proving with your presence that you exist, not through effort, but through principle, through stillness, through that quiet, grounded energy that doesn't beg for attention, but stabilizes the room just by being there, because in the end, the man who is feared may be obeyed, but he's often resented. The man who is loved may be cherished, but he's often used. But the man who is respected, he remains untouched, not because he threatens others, but because he doesn't move for them. And when you become that kind of man, you'll never have to ask for respect again. You are the respect, which leads us to the fourth lesson. Stop being useful at your own expense. Seneca once said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." You've worked so hard to be helpful, dependable, the one everyone leans on. You've built a reputation for being the guy who fills in the gaps, steps in without complaint, and says yes when everyone else hesitates. You even smooth over tension before it erupts. But here's what happens. People stop seeing your strength. They start seeing your compliance. And the longer you stay in that role, the more invisible you become, until one day you try to step back, and suddenly they act like you've betrayed them. That's the silent cost of being the good one. You become a tool, not a man. You train people to believe that your time doesn't belong to you, that your peace is theirs to take. And when you finally say no, they're not just surprised, they're disappointed. But it's not because you've changed. It's because you've stopped erasing yourself. And the truth is, they never even noticed you were disappearing until you refused to vanish. Take James, a marketing manager who did everything right, never missed a deadline, took on extra work, ran meetings when his supervisor was absent. His inbox was always open, his phone never off. For years, this made him indispensable, until the company restructured, and no one even asked for his opinion. No meeting, no gratitude, just a severance email. That's what his self-sacrifice bought him. So how do we stop this cycle without becoming cold, bitter, or withdrawn? Let's answer that in the next section. Previously, we saw how overextending yourself for others can cost you everything, including your dignity. Now, let's look at the deeper truth behind why that happens. and what Stoicism says you must do to stop it. James wasn't let go because he failed. He was let go because they never saw him as a leader. They saw him as support, reliable, replaceable, quiet, and safe. And that's the danger. Stoicism warns us about the illusion of virtue, where your silence is mistaken for nobility and your compliance becomes a liability. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." So ask yourself, if your kindness makes you invisible, is that really strength? If your usefulness makes you disposable, is that truly virtue? No, it's not. You're not a resource. You're not a backup plan. You are a person, a presence, and presence requires limits. Being good without clarity is not noble. It's a trap. You keep pouring yourself out, thinking that your exhaustion means you're doing something meaningful. But that's not purpose. That's depletion. And the harsher truth? The more you give without boundaries, the more others take, without even realizing it. Not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to feel safe in your silence. And over time, comfort without accountability turns into entitlement. Epictetus warned against this. He taught that a man must never surrender his ability to choose, not even in the name of kindness. That doesn't mean becoming selfish or cold. It means recognizing the difference between choice and compulsion. It means acting from reason, not from the desperate hope that someone might approve of you, because once your goodness is managed by everyone else's needs, it's no longer yours. It's not strength. It's quiet desperation dressed as virtue. Real. Stoic practice doesn't begin when you burn out. It begins the moment you draw the line before exhaustion. It begins when you say no, not with rage, but with calm alignment. When you stop rushing to catch what others drop and instead let them carry their own weight. This isn't cruelty. It's clarity. It's how you reclaim yourself without apology or over-explanation. And when you live like that, people may not always like it, but they will respect it, because they'll finally see the man who set the boundary, not to control others, but to protect himself. So next time you feel that automatic urge to say yes, pause, ask yourself, is this helping or hiding? Is this generosity or fear of being unloved? Because every time you choose silence over self-respect, you slowly disappear. And Stoicism? It's not the art of vanishing, it's the courage to exist fully, even if that means no longer being everyone's go-to solution. But how do you exist fully when you've been conditioned to shrink? Let's explore that in the next part. Previously, we uncovered the quiet cost of betraying yourself just to belong, the slow disappearance of your own voice. Now we face one of the deepest truths of all. When you trade your soul for acceptance, you don't gain safety. You lose yourself. 5. Don't trade your soul for acceptance. You can follow every rule. You can show up early. You can keep your head down, smile, and never raise your voice. And still, one day, without warning, you can be replaced. Why? Because acceptance isn't loyalty. It's conditional convenience. And when your identity depends on staying accepted, you silently give others the power to define your worth. That's not kindness. That's surrender. Far too many men live by an invisible contract. Keep the peace. Avoid tension. Stay agreeable. And in return, what? You'll be safe? But safe from what exactly? Safe from being judged, from being rejected, or worse, safe from finally standing up and being seen for who you really are, rather than who others prefer you to be. When you shape your life around being accepted, you don't stay safe. You slowly disappear, piece by piece. Your preferences, you silence them. Your values, you smooth them out so they'll fit neatly into the room. Eventually, your presence becomes performance. You become a mirror for others' comfort, not a reflection of your own truth. And the price of that performance? Clarity. Because a man who cannot say no isn't at peace. He's hiding. There was a time when you spoke without hesitation, when you acted from instinct, when you drew clear lines without feeling guilt. But over the years, life taught you to start negotiating with your integrity, one awkward moment at a time, one conflict avoided, one compromise made. And now, your voice feels foreign in your own mouth. You wonder why you feel invisible, even when surrounded by people. You wonder why doing everything right still leaves you feeling drained. Epictetus warned us. When you start valuing the approval of others more than your own judgment, you don't just lose confidence, you lose autonomy. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens through tiny, daily concessions. Each time you say yes out of guilt, each time you stay quiet to avoid discomfort, each time you mute your instincts just to keep the peace. These aren't harmless habits. They are small, sharp cuts, deep slices to the root of who you truly are. Marcus Aurelius didn't ask to be loved. He asked to live with justice. He didn't strive to please everyone. He strived to live in harmony. With reason, that's how he ruled an empire, without letting the empire rule him. But what does it look like today to live that way? To reclaim your power without apology? That's where we go next. In the last part, we reflected on how Marcus Aurelius acted from principle, not from the need for approval. He didn't wait for permission from the world. He moved with clarity and let the world adjust or not. That's the essence of Stoic power. Presence without apology, that's power without pretense. If your sense of peace only exists when others like you, then it's not peace, it's dependency, it's a trap. And the more you chase that fragile approval, the more distant you become from yourself. That's why the men who constantly try to be liked often end up exhausted, bitter, and silently resentful. They smile, but they're tense. They agree, but they're angry. They nod, but deep inside, they're drowning. Because when your entire identity is built around being non-threatening, you lose the ability to speak your truth. But Stoicism never told you to be passive. It calls you to be principled. And living by principles comes at a cost. You will disappoint people. You will have to draw hard lines. You will walk away from things and people, not to punish them, but to protect your peace. You weren't made to be consumed. You were made to be centered, and if someone only values you when you say yes, then they never truly valued you. They valued your obedience, your compliance, your silence. So stop begging to belong. Stop reshaping yourself to fit someone else's mold. Stand firm. Speak when it counts. Say no when it protects your integrity. Because the man who stops trading his soul for acceptance becomes someone far more powerful. He becomes a man who respects himself more than he fears being misunderstood. 6. Let go of the need to be understood. You don't need to be understood by everyone. In fact, the moment you start living in full alignment with your truth, you won't be, and that's not a failure. That's Freedom, trying to explain your boundaries to those who benefit from your silence? That's not dialogue, that's surrender. And the longer you stay addicted to being understood, the more you postpone becoming the man you were meant to be. Most men live trapped in this quiet war. They want to change. They want to say no. They want to set boundaries. But they hesitate, not because they lack awareness, but because they fear the consequences of no longer being the agreeable, reliable, easy version of themselves that others have come to expect. So they shrink back. They keep the peace again. They stay silent again. Until one day they wake up and realize they've built their entire life around a mask. And the worst part? No one really knows the man underneath. Now, imagine this. You've always been the one who in the last part we asked, what happens when you live behind a mask for too long? Now let's bring that idea into focus, because the moment you stop being agreeable for survival, you begin reclaiming who you truly are. You've always been the one who says yes, the one who listens more than you speak, the one who forgives even when the apology never comes. You've been the peacekeeper in your friend group, the dependable one at work, the safe, steady presence in your relationships. And then, on the day you finally say, I'm not available, I disagree, people flinch. They say, you've changed, but you haven't changed. You've returned, you've stopped abandoning yourself just to be understood. And their discomfort, that's not your burden anymore. It's your liberation. Marcus Aurelius never sought universal understanding. He sought justice, reason, and integrity. He knew the truth doesn't need to be applauded to remain true. Epictetus taught that when a man begins to live according to his nature, to act from clarity rather than compliance, he will face resistance. But that resistance isn't a sign that something's wrong. It's a sign that you've finally stopped performing. When you start setting clear boundaries, people will call you difficult. When you start prioritizing your well-being, they'll say you're selfish. When you stop apologizing for existing fully, they'll call you arrogant. But those words, they're not about you. They're about what your silence used to give them. They're not reacting to your truth. They're reacting to the absence of your obedience. Stoicism teaches us that real peace doesn't come from being agreeable or liked. It comes from alignment, from acting in accordance with your values regardless of the crowd. You don't need to be explained. You need to be embodied. And that embodiment begins the moment you stop trying to justify your growth. You are not obligated to remain the smaller version of yourself just because that's what makes others feel comfortable. You are not required to dim your strength because someone else is intimidated by it. Let them misunderstand you. Let them mislabel your clarity as coldness, because the man who chases universal approval is chasing a ghost. But the man who is rooted in principle, who speaks only when it matters and stands silently when it doesn't, he doesn't need applause. He doesn't need to be understood. He needs to be true. So next time you feel the urge to explain, to soften your truth, or to shrink back into a version of yourself that no longer fits, hold on to that thought. In the next part, we'll uncover what it means to finally stand in your truth without fear. In the last part, we explored what happens when you stop explaining yourself just to be accepted. Now, let's look closer at that quiet, powerful moment, the moment you pause instead of over-explaining and choose to stand in your truth. When you feel that pressure rise, to soften your stance, to explain your no, to make others feel safe at the expense of your own honesty, pause, that's the moment. That's when the real choice happens. The choice to be a man of reason, not reaction. The choice to stop asking for understanding and start embodying stillness, because that kind of man doesn't beg for respect. He earns it, not through noise or people-pleasing, but through grounded presence. 7. Self-respect is your true freedom. There's something deeply powerful about the moment a man finally chooses himself, not out of ego, but out of clarity, when he stops bending to gain approval and starts standing firmly on principle. The shift isn't loud, it's not dramatic, but it's permanent. He speaks less, but when he does, his words carry weight. He smiles less, but when he enters a room, his calm quiets the chaos. He no longer lives to please. He lives anchored in self-respect, and that right there is where freedom truly begins. At first, this new way of living may feel strange, especially if you've spent years being the good guy, the one who stays silent so others feel comfortable, the one who says yes out of habit, not because he believes it, the one who's been praised for being patient, admired for being agreeable, applauded for being kind. But all those compliments never added up to real respect, did they? Deep down, you already know why. Because you weren't being respected, you were being tolerated, and what they tolerated was your disappearance. True self-respect isn't measured by how others treat you. It's built on what you refuse to compromise, even when no one is watching. It's forged in the quiet moments when you say no without guilt. When you choose silence, not because you're scared, but because the argument isn't worth your peace. When you walk away, not because you're weak, but because staying would require you to betray yourself. Take the story of Daniel, a quiet man, the family peacemaker. He absorbed every insult, mediated every conflict, and smiled through years of subtle disrespect. They called him the glue. But he wasn't glue. He was a buffer, absorbing pain so others didn't have to feel it. Until one night, after another exhausting dinner where he bit his tongue to keep the peace, he stood up. He didn't yell. He didn't explain. He simply left, and for the first time, he didn't apologize. That night, he slept like a free man. Seneca once warned, "A life without adversity is a life untested." But what kind of man emerges once he stops fearing the test? Let's explore that next. In the last part, we asked what kind of man emerges when he no longer fears adversity. But what if the greatest adversity isn't out there in the world? What if it's inside? What if the real test isn't about enduring external storms, but whether you can stop trading your values for harmony? What if strength means no longer shrinking just to make others feel comfortable? The Stoic answer is clear and unwavering. Dignity demands friction. If no one ever pushes back when you set a boundary, it means you haven't truly set one. You've merely hinted. Marcus Aurelius didn't strive to be feared. He didn't seek admiration. What he sought above all was justice. He stood firm in what he knew was right, even when it cost him comfort or popularity. That is Stoic freedom. Not the absence of conflict, but the refusal to be controlled by it. You can be calm without being compliant. You can be kind without being consumed. So what does self-respect look like in real life? It means you stop explaining your boundaries. You stop managing how others react to your truth. You stop apologizing for being clear. And most importantly, You stop chasing peace by sacrificing yourself, because peace built on self-erasure, that's not peace, that's paralysis. The man who respects himself commands a different energy, not aggressive, not loud, but undeniable. People may not always like that man, but they always feel him. And that man, that's the version of you that you were meant to become. Not the agreeable, polished version they preferred, but the real version, the one they were never prepared to meet. And once you step into that truth, you stop chasing freedom. You become it, because you were never meant to live your life chasing quiet approval. You were meant to stand tall, not in rebellion, but in alignment. Throughout this video, we've uncovered a truth that many men carry silently, that trying too hard to be good often leads to self-erasure. You become agreeable, you become available, you become invisible, and in all that silence, you lose your presence. But Stoic philosophy offers you a way back, not through rebellion, but through reason, not through rage, but through discipline. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus never asked us to perform virtue for the world. They asked us to embody it. And true virtue? It demands that you stand firm in your truth, guard your energy with care, and stop pleasing others at the expense of your self-respect. So start small. Start now. Say no when you mean it. Speak up when something... Let's continue that final call to action in the next part. In the previous part, we challenged you to start living with intention, to say no when you mean it, and to speak when something truly matters. Now let's bring it all together with the actions that anchor your self-respect in the real world. Set emotional boundaries without guilt. Guard your energy like your life depends on it. Respect your time, as if it's your most valuable possession, because it is. And if you feel resistance rising as you do these things, good. That resistance is a sign. It means you're no longer available for manipulation. It means you've stopped floating and started carrying weight. You don't need to be harsh. You need to be honest. You don't need to become cold. You need to be calm. This is what Stoic masculinity looks like. Anchored, focused, unshakable in principle. It's not about being liked. It's about being real. So ask yourself, what would change in your life if you stopped trying to be good and started choosing to be grounded? Think about that. Sit with it, and let the answers shape how you show up from this moment forward. And if this message resonated with you, if it reflected something true in your experience, share your thoughts. Because your story might be the mirror that helps another man stop hiding and start becoming.